Okay, so we've seen how we can use an array to store some values. We saw integers, we saw strings to hold some letters. Let's do something that is a little bit more interesting. So now we're going to make an array that is of the type PImage, which is, as we've seen before, the variable type for images. So we're going to have a whole bunch of images that are all going to be loaded into an array. So it's going to be just a big collection of images. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use a for loop to do that. We're going to use a for loop to load all those image files into the various spots of the array. So just like we used the for loop to set our numbers array to be a bunch of random numbers, we're going to use that to load all of our image files into the array. And then once they're there, we can use our draw loop, our draw section of code, to cycle through those images, and the result of it will be like an animated image or a GIF or GIF, whichever you prefer. I usually say GIF. I know it's a heated debate, so we'll not get into it today. But that's the plan. So we're going to basically recreate a GIF using an array of images and then cycling through them. So let's take a look at how we can do that. All right, so here we go with a new sketch called Week4 Class1B. Now, if you go to Sketch and then Show Sketch Folder or Command K, that brings you to the folder where your sketch lives. And you can see that in mine, I have a folder called Data, and inside of it, we have 75 images. You're saying, like, wait a second, mark that less than said 74. Ah, right, but we start counting as a 0. So 0 to 74 is 75 things. So here I've actually listed the index number with each image, but there are a total of 75 elements. So let's see what images we have here. Okay, so smoke. So what we're going to be doing here is recreating this smoke GIF. So this folder of images will be in the resources repo on our Glass GitHub. So make sure you download that and put all these images into a data folder inside of your sketch folder. Okay, so let's move that over to the side for the moment. Okay, so let's get the initial stuff going here. So we're going to say void setup. Definitely going to use our draw section today. Now I'm going to do something. I'm going to make the size coincide with the resolution of our image. So if we scroll down here, we can see that the dimensions of all these images is 320 by 480. So I'm going to set my size of my window to be the same thing, 320 by 480. Size 320, 480. Okay, great. Now let's see, what else do we need at the moment? I think we're good to get rolling here. Okay, so just like in the last example, let's go ahead and set up the array that was going to hold all of our images. Now before we saw that we had int and we had string arrays. Today, we're going to be doing an array of PImages. So we're saying, all right, processing, we're going to make a new array of type PImage. And because this is going to be an animation, I'm going to call these frames. That's going to be the name of our array. Okay. Now we do the rest of it just like we saw before with new PImage array. Now we have to tell it how many elements will be in this array, and we know that that is 75. Great. So new PImage array with 75 elements. Excellent. All right. Now let's go ahead and get all those image files loaded into this array. So how are we going to do that? Well, we know that from previous lectures that there's a function built into processing called load image, right? And that takes a file name and it sets it into a PImage variable. So we've seen something before where it's like, PImage, let's say image equals load image and then the file name. We're going to do the same process, but now because our array is full of PImages, we can just directly load it into spots of our array. So let's see what that looks like. So just like we loaded all those random numbers into our integer array in the last video, we can use a for loop to load all of these images into our PImage array. So just like before, I'm going to create a for loop. I'm going to say for int I equals 0. So again, we're going to start with that 0 because our first index is 0. We're going to say I is less than, in this case, we can use our fancy way to say the name of the array, frames, dot length. So we're going to go from the first index value, which is 0, all the way through the array. And just like before, we want to increment I by 1. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 74. All right. Get a curly bracket going. Alrighty, so now we have I counting from 0 to 74, so it's going through each spot in our array. So now to actually set those set those images, we're going to need to say frames. That's the name of our array. Now, what spot do we want to load each image? We want to use the index value, so 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And because I is already counting that for us, we can just say frames I. And now we have to set it to something. So I'm going to show you a little bit of magic here. So we're going to still use that load image function. That'll be good. But now I've conveniently done something for you. I have named all of these files, all these image files, to be identical except for that index number, right? So all of them start with frame underscore and they all end with .jpg. So because of that, we can do something a little bit fancy. We can say the file name is going to be frame underscore. They all have that. But now we can say plus I. So it's going to use that index value. So 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 74 plus .jpg. So you can see that all of the words and letters, all the strings, we put in quotes. But then we're adding that I value, which goes from 0 to 74, and then ending with .jpg, which is going to give us this, frame underscore 0.jpg, 1.jpg, 2, and so on. Okay. So let's make a comment here. Load all images into the PImage array called frames. Great. Now, let's just confirm that this works by doing what we've done before. So like, we saw before that we wanted to print out one element of our array. We could say, before we said print numbers at index 2, and that showed us our third number in the array. So let's do that with this. So instead of printing it out, what I want to do is I actually want to show the image that's located, how about at the very beginning of our array. So remember, image function takes the actual image and then the location you want to draw it, in this case 0, 0. So this is saying, get me the image that's located, the first image in our array. So at index 0, the first element, the first image. And then actually show that image on the screen. So let's see what we get. And there it is. Great. So that took our very first image at index 0. Let's show the, how about 13th index. So the 14th image in our array. And there it is. Great. Okay. So now what we're going to do, I think you might be maybe kind of getting a sense of how we're going to approach this. We want to be cycling through all of these images to give the effect of an animation. So what did I just do to change between images? I just increased this value, right? So what we want to do is have a variable that's going to keep track of what frame we're on. So are we on the first image, the second image, the third image, the fourth image, and so on. And we're just going to increment that over time. So let me comment this out for now. And we're going to need that variable. So let's call that up here. Let's say we're going to have an int called frame number. That's what frame number we're on. Let's start it at 0 because we want to start at the beginning of our animation. So this will be the actual variable that will tell us what image do we actually want to draw from our array. Okay, so let's use it. So instead of giving it a fixed number like 13, we can say something like this. Image frames, that's our array. And instead of drawing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, we're going to use frame num as the reference to whatever index we're going to be grabbing from. And we're going to draw it at 0, 0. So this says draw the image, I'll say draw the current image. So let's just run this and see what we get. Okay, same thing as when this was 0 because frame number is 0. And so right now everything's static, but we are drawing that first image over and over and over again. Good, I mean, it's not what we want, but we're on the right track. Great. So then, how can we actually cycle through these images? Well, we can just add an increment frame number, right? We can say frame num plus plus. Because now that means that every time draw happens over and over again, it'll be first 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, all the way up. And so we should see our animation happen, cycling through all of our images. Great. Aha, but something's wrong, right? Array index out of bounds. Okay, what does that mean? So this happens, this out of bounds happens when we're trying to tell processing to give us something from our array, but that the index we're telling it to get is greater than the number of things we actually have in our array. So we know that our array indices, if we look back here, we go from 0 all the way up to 74. And now we can see that when frame number, which was counting up by 1, when that got to 75, well, there is no frame underscore 75.jpg, so processing broke, right? It's like, hey, you don't have an image there. Why are you telling me to draw that? So luckily, there's an easy fix that you might have guessed. But that is, we can use a conditional statement to basically reset frame number back to 0 once it gets to the end of our array. So let's see how we could do that. I'll make a comment here. Increase frame num by 1. All right, so now let's put in our conditional statement. So if frame num is greater than or equal to 75, let's say, just to kind of keep it clear for now. Then what? Well, if that's the case, we want frame num to be 0. So if we've reached the end of the array, reset frame num back to the beginning of the array. Beginning of the array. So we go from 0 up to 74. If it's 75 or bigger, then reset to 0. All right, and let's see how that works. Perfect. And now this animation should just kind of go on indefinitely. Okay, great. Now I want to show you one other semi-related strategy in processing to deal with time. So some of you might have figured out that you can, and I think we've seen it in a lecture, you can change your frame rate. You can say, so by default, processing, I believe, is at 60 frames per second is the default. So this draw loop is running 60 times per second over and over and over again. We can change that by saying frame rate, and you can make it slower, like 10, let's say. So now we have 10 frames per second. So this should go much more slowly. Cool. But this is not a great strategy for controlling when things happen, because we don't really, because you can imagine if our code is more complex, we don't necessarily want everything running slowly. We just want to see the images more slowly. But maybe we have other things running in our code that we want to still be happening at the full, fast frame count and not get slowed down. So there's a little strategy I like to use quite a bit that's using a new type of operator that we haven't seen called the modulo. It's a little bit of a weird thing to get your head around, and we'll talk more about it in another lecture, but I just want to introduce it here just to see how it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an if statement that basically, in sort of like pseudocode language, is going to say every 10 frames increase frame number. So not every single draw loop, not every single frame of our animation, just every 10 frames. That's when I want frame count to get bigger. And the result of that is it means that just like when we said frame rate 10, the result of that is our animation is going to go slower. So here's how this works. So we say if, and then processing has built in for us something called frameCount. So that's just counting all of the frames that have gone by in our sketch. So it starts at 0 and just keeps counting up as long as our program is running. Okay, so here's the kind of weird bit. So modulo, it's the percent sign, 10 equals 0. Okay, let's talk about this in a second. I'm gonna, let's talk about it. So basically, without getting into it too much today, what this is basically saying is whenever the result of this division, so this divided by this, has a remainder of 0. If you remember from math class, you might have like, you divide something and it doesn't divide evenly, so you have a remainder. Well, anytime there is no remainder, then do whatever happens inside of this if statement. So let's actually get that if statement set up. So all of this can bop over. Oh, by the way, if you want to indent a whole selection of things, you can do command and then your curly bracket or square bracket keys, so left, right, right, left. Anyway, so basically what we're saying here with this if statement is that anytime the division of frame count by 10 has a remainder of 0, do this stuff. Now what does that actually mean for us? Basically, this is a way of saying every 10 frames do something, and that something is this. So you can imagine if another way, and so the nice thing is that this never really changes this part of it. It's just this number. So if I want something to happen every 10 frames, I put 10 in there. If I want something to happen every 100 frames, I just change that to 100. Let's see the result of this. Okay, cool. So we have our slower animation like we wanted. We're increasing frame num only every 10 frames. But everything else in our code can run as fast as it wants to, or I guess as fast as our computer can allow it. Let's just illustrate this point. So I'm going to do frame num 100. So now we're going to only switch to the next image every 100 frames. Now we see much, much more slowly. Okay, so let's just put a comment here to know what we're doing. So we're saying, how about if 100 frames have gone by, aka do something every 100 frames. And again, that 100 is just whatever number is there. And this is what we're saying. Let's do this every 100 frames. And let's just put it back to 10 so it's a bit more useful. Okay. If we were to put this at 1 frame, we'd get back to where we always have been, because we're going to increase frame number every 1 frame. But if we want to slow it down for any reason or control the timing of things, this is one strategy. Okay. All right, that is all for today. We've seen some basic array business in the first lecture, some slightly more interesting stuff with creating this animation. And in the next lecture, we're going to see how we can use an array in an even more complex way to get some really interesting drawing behavior. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you soon.